Welcome everybody to our weekly program, the Fond du Lac History. I am Kim Everson. I'm on the board of directors of the Fond du Lac County Historical Society and a volunteer on our programming committee. I'm pleased tonight to introduce Teresa Keenan, who is going to present. Teresa is a real estate agent and involved community member. Prior to becoming a real estate agent, Teresa successfully served the nonprofit sector in fund development for 2 local agencies. She serves as the board president for the Fond du Lac County Historical Society, is a member of the City of Fond du Lac's Historical Preservation Commission, and has recently joined Service League as a way to continue to give back to the community. Teresa and her husband are very proud owners of a historic home in Fond du Lac. Together they have 5 beautiful children, 3 adorable grandchildren, and a very spoiled German Shepherd. And now, with a few clicks, I'm going to turn the reins over to Teresa for her presentation, Fond du Lac and Historic Homes. So I'm going to go to you, Teresa, and I'm going to make you the host, and then you can share your screen and take over.
Okay, and it looks like I am the host now. So I'm going to go and share my screen. Okay, so you should all see a picture of a historic home in Fond du Lac. So first of all, I wanted to say thanks to everybody for joining us tonight. This is a really new series that we're doing here with the Fond du Lac County Historical Society. Just looking for input on this presentation tonight as well. So if you have ideas on things that you'd like to see in the future, we're definitely all ears, open to suggestions. My presentation tonight is on historic homes in Fond du Lac. And let me just preface this by saying I am neither a teacher nor a presenter. And I am not even that much of I don't know if I'd call myself really a local historian. I am probably first and foremost a lover of historic homes. So I've kind of tried to tie together some personal stories, but given that we have a kind of a big group here, I would love some interaction. So if there's a story that I don't have all the info for and you do, please feel free to jump in and share so we can make this interactive. You'll see a very pretty colonial style on my cover of my presentation here. That's 300 Sheboygan Street. That is actually the house that my father-in-law grew up in. And I learned yesterday that Kim's husband grew up in this house as well. So that's what I love about Fond du Lac. There's just so many connections, among families and with our history. So, just kind of another cool thing that I learned about this. So a little bit about me. Kim mentioned I'm the board president for the Fond du Lac County Historical Society. I'm also a member of the City of Fond du Lac's Historic Preservation Commission, and you might wonder what is the difference between those two, and we will get into that. I am also a real estate agent, which is pretty cool when you love historic homes because I actually get to go into a lot of historic homes, and Fond du Lac is really kind of a treasure trove of historic homes, and they don't all have to be the big fancy huge ones. There are some really beautiful examples in this community of bungalows, Fond du Lac squares, colonial style. Just we have a ton of beautiful homes that have actually been quite preserved over the years. And so I often will just go into a home and see kind of a neat element and take a photo of it. So I'm also an old house owner. I own a Craftsman house that was built in 1914, and I'll show you a little photo of that in a second here. I am an admin. I started a Facebook page a couple years ago called Historic Properties of Fond du Lac, and if you don't follow us, you should come check us out. It's just a fun Facebook page for sharing different homes in Fond du Lac that we like. So for instance, ever since I grew up, there have been houses that I have looked at and admired and always thought, oh, if I could ever go inside, I would love to see the inside of those. If I drive by one and I like it, I go try to do a little bit of research and just post it on my Facebook page. So feel free to join us. So this is my historic home. My home is an American Craftsman, and it is brick and stucco, and it has a lot of painted wood trim. So we actually did quite the transformation on our house a couple years ago. Our house used to be, the stucco used to be kind of a peachy orange color, and then the trim was a dark fit the personality of the house. So I actually did consult with someone to find historically appropriate colors for the house, and I think it turned out really beautifully. And you'll see that one of the things that I love about Craftsman, and there's different architectural elements in all homes, all historic homes that I really like. What I like about Craftsman is they always have the really steeply pitched roof, and they have those roof brackets, and I just think that that's kind of a cool element. Our home was actually owned by Henry and Clementina Potter first, and Henry Potter was the president of Commercial National Bank, which, from according to my research, and feel free anyone to jump in if my research isn't proving to be accurate, but that bank was located in the building that we now call the Dane and Worm Pharmacy building. And then also this kind of became, you know, the much bigger bank of National Exchange later on down the road. I know National Exchange has gone through a lot of iterations and a lot of merging. So from what I've read, this bank became part of that down the road. And then it was also owned by Henry and Helen Tuig. Henry Tuig was a physician. And obviously everyone knows that the Tuig name is a strong name in our community. They're well-known business people. So the obsession with historic homes starts as a young girl. So this is a cool photo that I found from a publication called Fond du Lac Illustrated, and it was published in 1898. And this is a view of Division Street looking east, I believe. So when I was growing up, I actually grew up in North Fond du Lac. So Fond du Lac very often, other than having to go to the doctor or the dentist or something like that. And so going to the doctor, obviously we would drive down Division Street, and I just completely fell in love with Division Street, and every house kind of spoke to me for different reasons. Interestingly, the one that is across the street from me now is the one I really had my eye on as a kid. It's a beautiful Victorian with a big window, and you guys might remember that was the house that had when there was always a spotlight shining down on it. It was just very pretty. And so I just started kind of hoping I could be a historic homeowner someday. And prior to the house that we live in now, I did live in a 1919, what I would probably call like a 2-story Craftsman bungalow. And it was very small, but very beautiful, lots of pretty woodwork. So a frequently asked question that I get is, what is the difference between the Fond du Lac County Historical Society and the City of Fond du Lac's Historic Preservation Commission? They're two very different entities, and while we do kind of collaborate together on some things, sometimes they really exist on their own. The Fond du Lac County Historical Society was founded in 1948 and is our county's most, what we would say, our memory and foremost storyteller of all of the history and the people in our area. Our mission is connecting people to history by inspiring passion, preservation, exploration, and fun. So in 1948, which was the centennial birthday for the state of Wisconsin, people started kind of realizing, okay, that's a lot of years, and maybe we need to have something to celebrate history and preserve history. So several people in the community came together and started this organization. So we are actually a society, which means we have members, also a nonprofit organization, of course. So in the very beginning, I think they just wanted to protect some of the artifacts that we have. Now you'll see we have, not only do we have a lot of artifacts to display and preserve, we've got a lot of documentation over the county that we have moved and put in place to make sure that they remain the way that they were. And hopefully you'll get a chance to do some driving by this summer and see all the wonderful things that we have going on with some of those buildings. We're actually doing some extensive renovations, very needed at this point in time. Then there is the City of Fond du Lac's Historic Preservation Commission. So that is actually, I don't know if arm of government is the right word for it, but it's actually a commission within the city government. Most cities do have a Historic Preservation Commission. So those meetings happen, they're scheduled every month. We don't have them every month, but they are open to the public, and really exists because the City of Fond du Lac recognized the need to preserve and protect our architectural, historical, archaeological, and cultural buildings and sites, because they do contribute to our city's identity. The Historic Preservation Commission is responsible for designating significant historic properties and then reviewing those projects, reviewing the projects that would affect those properties. So obviously there's a couple different levels of designation of historic, and we've got the national level, the state level, and the local level. The local level really is kind of exists more just for preservation. So at the state level and the national level, there are tax credits and different programs that you can apply for if you need funds for your historic home. Unfortunately, our city doesn't really have that. However, I'm a strong believer in the Historic Preservation Commission because it protects buildings moving forward. So for instance, you know, let's say there was a beautiful building that has, or house that has clapboard siding and it needs to be painted every 10 to 15 years. Obviously that is a large expense. So we've seen over the years that clapboard's been covered up by vinyl siding, which completely changes the look and kind of the architectural significance of the property. Something like that with a home that is designated as locally historic, and you've probably seen the little plaques around town, they're usually in the front yards. That means that building is historic according to the City of Fond du Lac. Those properties, if there's any exterior alterations that need to be done, those properties do need to be reviewed by this commission. And the goal of this commission is certainly not to put homeowners into any kind of financial bind, but just to continue to reinforce the importance of historic preservation and making our properties look like they did when they were built. So we do have a couple residential historic districts in Fond du Lac. We have the East Division, Sheboygan Street Historic District, and the Linden Street Historic District. There is a commercial district, part of Main Street is locally designated. I'm just going to focus on the residential districts tonight, but if you are interested in more information, the city's historic preservation page on their website is really great, and there's a lot of really great resources there. This is just kind of an overview of the East Division Street, Sheboygan Street Historic District boundaries, and hopefully you've seen driving around that we actually have signs now that kind of mark those districts. That was something that we just got, I think, like last fall. So that was a thing that our commission asked the city to consider. A lot of other cities have those signs to help people understand when they're coming into a historic district. So we were able to get them in this district. I'm hoping that we'll see that at Linden Street maybe later this year. So I'm just kind of, my thought here tonight is, and again, please feel free to jump in, because some of these houses I don't have a ton of stories for, but I wanted to make this a mix of not only maybe some stories of some interesting people who lived in some of these houses, but just I picked a couple different architectural styles that I personally enjoy, so we can talk about the style, and if there is a fun story that goes along with the house, then obviously we can speak to that as well. So the first one I have here is, I picked this because it's just the very first house on the east, to the east, I believe, of the East Division Street district. And this is actually known as the Hamilton House. It was built in 1886, and it is a pretty good example of a Greek revival. This, and if you tune into Kim's presentation about the Pyre family, you'll probably know about Kate Hamilton Pyre already, but I really like the history of what her story is. So I just kind of wanted to touch on her. So she she actually grew up in this house. And so she was the daughter of Mary Meakin Hamilton and John Hamilton. And John Hamilton, I didn't know this prior to my research, but I guess he was a real estate agent in the 1800s. So considering that's what I do, I thought that was very interesting, because I would love to know more about what real estate would have been like in the 1800s. And Kate was kind of the apple of her father's eye from the way that it sounds. And she spent a lot of time with him when he was going to work and doing business. She didn't have any formal business training, but just being part of his work and observing his work, she really became very knowledgeable. As her business talents grew, the community sought her out for her real estate advice and probate advice. So, I mean, she was really, really ahead of her time, which is what I love about her. So they had a few daughters, and her daughter wanted to go to law school because obviously seeing, what her father was doing and her mother was kind of starting to get involved in, and she wanted to go to Madison. And so Kate and her husband were concerned about their daughter going off to Madison kind of by herself, plus being in this very male-dominated industry. So Kate decided to go with her and decided to get her education as well. So they began law school in 1886. One thing that I also thought was very cool about Kate Hamilton Pyre was that she was the first woman in the county to vote, even before suffrage was passed. And from what I understand about Kate Hamilton Pyre is you kind of didn't want to mess with her. So if she said she was going to come in and vote, she was going to vote, and you weren't going to do anything about it. So I love that. I think that's really awesome. Moving along to the Linden Street Historic District. This is just kind of a little overview of that district. So I do have an example of a house in the Linden District. This was Charles Blankenberg, and if anyone can chime in about Charles Blankenberg, it appears to me that he was a pastor or very involved in the Salem Methodist Church. I couldn't find a ton of information on him, but I just thought that, this is one of those houses that it's so old now, it kind of blends into the background, but obviously in its day, it was probably pretty spectacular. So this is actually called a front gable house. You'll see kind of off to the right there, that's called an L, which mean in architecture that when a property, or excuse me, like a building forms like an L, this is ELL, but it's kind of based off of L shape. So it also has a simple front porch, and then it's hard to see, but it has actually like a cutout frieze along the top of the porch. So that's just kind of an extra design element that, was put onto that house. And apparently it's still there, which unless somebody duplicated it, that I don't know, but if it's original, that's pretty impressive. So if the Charles Blankenberg also had another Linden Street house, I don't have that on here, but he was a furniture dealer, and then he did have a relative, and I'm not sure if it was his brother or subsequent, relative, the Kendall Blankenberg house, which some of you may have seen on 6th Street. It's a very, very unusual Gothic style house with a really tall limestone foundation that comes up really high out of the ground. I actually got to show that house last fall. It was on the market. And it was, I would call it a kind of a precursor to almost like a quad level. It was just a very interesting layout, and really, really a neat house. And it's actually one of my daughter's favorite homes in Fond du Lac. So now so those were just some examples from the different historic districts. Now I'm going to move on to a few architectural styles, some examples, and then the personal stories that go along with those. So this is an example of Italianate architecture. This is 213 East 1st Street. This is the Francis Fee and Hattie Ryan Duffy house, and that was built circa 1880. Obviously, this one is still standing proud and tall. This one is currently on the market, actually. This one is for sale. I don't think it has an accepted offer yet, so if you are in the market for a historic home, they're pretty reasonably priced because it is a labor of love. Let me tell you, they do require some maintenance, which my husband, I think, would attest to. And I think he's on this call, so he'll probably not chime in, but he's probably chiming in down in the basement. So this house is, like I said, the Frances Fee and Hattie Ryan Duffy house. Again, it's interesting to me when you start looking back on all of the people that kind of got Fond du Lac moving and how many were, attorneys and politicians and really kind of the people that really helped solidify the community and help it to move forward. This house was actually, I wasn't able to find any further background on it from prior to, there's stories about Hattie and Frances once they're married, but this house was actually owned by Hattie prior to being married to Frances, which was pretty unusual back in the day. There's not a ton of information on that other than to say it was just titled in her name, and then those two got married. And he was actually from Ireland, grew up in West Virginia, and came over here after working on the railroad and started studying law under the firm of Coleman and Spence. So he was admitted to the bar in 1877. So based on what I've read, it seems that I guess he didn't have to go to college to do that, which is pretty interesting. He just, I think back then, studying to be a lawyer was almost more of an apprenticeship. And as long as you could pass the bar, obviously you could practice. So in 1887, he married Hattie Ryan. They had 3 children. Most notable was Frances Ryan Duffy. So obviously named after his father and his mother's maiden name. He also practiced law, so followed in his father's footsteps and continued living in the house for much long after that when actually his mother died. So both Franceses lived in the house for some time. This house actually remained in the Duffy family until the 1940s. And then you probably remember that it actually functioned as a bed and breakfast for quite some time. I never was in it when it was a bed and breakfast. I actually did show this house also in the last few months, and it's pretty impressive. There's a lot of elements that are in that house that still appear to be original. So the next one that I have here is the American Foursquare, and I picked this one specifically because it was demolished. So this was 403 East Division Street, built in 1908, demolished in 1996, and I can tell just by looking at this photo that I would have probably loved this house. I don't really remember this one because, I was a teenager when it was demolished, but I think it's really important to focus on some of these buildings that are no longer with us. We get so focused on progress and modernization. And there is, in my opinion, there is something to be said for posterity, just for the sake of posterity, because once these houses are gone, they're gone and we can't get them back. I was fortunate enough to go to Europe last year, specifically Paris, and I love their commitment to preservation there. I mean, the oldest building I saw there was built in the 1300s, and they have very specific rules throughout the entire city about preservation and what can and what can't be done. And I think that's why cities like Paris thrive, because that commitment to preservation is so strong. It's so interwoven into their society. When they do things on these buildings, they just know, like there's restrictions, and that's okay, and you have to work through it. It's something that I wish as Americans we would start to grasp that concept a little bit more. Because look, I mean, this is only 1908. It's not, wouldn't have even been that old, and it's already gone. I know that, progress has to happen, but it's sad that this is no longer here. I know some of the Division Street houses, when Ignatian did their expansion, I know some of them got moved. So I think that's, at least that's comforting that some of them were able to be saved. So this was actually the Louis Zinke house. I wasn't able to find a ton about him, but I was able to gather that he was working with his father in the grocery trade, and then when his father retired, the firm continued under the name of the Zinke brothers. So he and his brothers ran a grocery store. They actually then expanded and started conducting more of a wholesale grocery business. And from what I was able to see, it was located somewhere in the vicinity of Division Street in the southwest corner of Macy. So I think that would be somewhere near where Chase Bank now sits. So it would be very cool, obviously not for the purpose of this presentation, but to find, you know, if there were any like pictures of some of those older little mom and pop shops, I would love to see that. So that's maybe something we could look into. My next example is my personal favorite, the American Craftsman. This is 136 Sheboygan Street. Most of you probably know this as the Dana House, circa 1906. So some of the pictures, and I probably should have said this before, but some of these pictures here are taken from the Wisconsin Historical Society's website. They did a survey on several homes in Fond du Lac in 1974. And another one in 1989. So you'll see kind of variations of the houses throughout the years, which I think is kind of cool to watch how they've changed. So like, for instance, my house, I showed you the paint job that we did. Our house actually used to be almost all brown. And I don't think I would have liked it very much because it just, even my husband said when he was a kid, he was like that. Our house, the house we live in now, never stood out to him because it was all brown. You know, there were no defining features of it. That's what I love about the Dana House. And I have to say that the current owners have done a beautiful job. They did some repainting in the last probably year or so. It was looking a little shabby for a while. And from what I understand, the new owners are really, really committed to, you know, kind of bringing back the life of it. I've never been in this house, but I've seen some of the pictures, and I know that there's a really elaborate, I don't know if you'd call it a skylight or something like that. The stairwell is massive and very impressive. And then there's this kind of globe-shaped like skylight. So there's some serious expense and detail in this house. What's interesting to me about these houses is that you can often get them for much less money than a newer construction home, and new construction homes don't have half the woodwork and detail and, you know, just some of those character and charm that we love about these historic homes. I mean, obviously we have to have newer homes, they have their place, but I much prefer the older homes, and I will gladly trade closet space for 8-inch to 12-inch baseboards. So I was not able to find too much about the Danas because this is not the Danas that owned Dana and Worm Pharmacy. This was actually George Dana, who from my research I was able to find actually owned a company called Globe Furniture Company. And I actually couldn't really find a ton on that. I did find this, which I just thought was kind of a neat little thing. He was actually featured in this business magazine that was called System, the Magazine of Business. And that publication ran from the 1800s to, I believe, the mid 1900s. So just doing my little searches for this half-hour presentation, you know, that's kind of the criteria I used was basically Google when I didn't know things. And I just thought this was kind of cool. He was just talking about, you know, this is when business was really starting to become, you know, probably a little bit more organized in the industrial age in America, and talking about, you know, in their Globe Furniture Company, how they were utilizing trucks for supplies and deliveries and things like that. I actually listed and sold this house, so I was in it several times. This is 180 East Division Street, known as the Benjamin and Adelaide Wild House, also the Fond du Lac Women's Club, circa 1896. This to me is a stunning example of Queen Anne architecture. So you'll see over on the left here, this is an actual, just like a rendering. So this was from that publication I mentioned before, Fond du Lac Illustrated, that was done in 1898. So you can see that you know, if you go through that publication, it shows who all of the owners were of a lot of these historic homes. And one of these days I have it on my bucket list to kind of recreate this booklet and try to find all of the homes that are mentioned. They don't have the addresses, so you would have to kind of drive around town and try to match up, you know, some of these different homes. But there's quite a few in this little illustrated book from 1898. So we've got a picture of the house in this one over on the right, I believe is 1974 from that survey. This is 1989, and you can see that it's looking a little bit run down in 1989. The current owners have done an incredible job with this home, and I think that their color scheme is perfect. I was obviously living, because I live on Division Street, I drive by it a lot, so I saw when they started undertaking the painting of it, and watching the transformation was amazing. So it was kind of a dusty blue and a tan color. Some of the trim was kind of a tan, and then there was kind of a lighter cream, and they opted to go with 2 shades of green and what looks like a light cream color. And it changed the look of the whole house, and I think they did a beautiful job. I understand they've done some quite extensive renovations on the inside as well. So this house was for Benjamin and Adelaide Wade. They were also, they were partners in the O'Brien dry goods store. I couldn't find a ton about the O'Brien dry goods store, but I would like to know more about that. It was one of the largest dry good businesses in downtown Fond du Lac. After they were no longer living in the house, it actually became the Fond du Lac Women's Clubhouse. So I did a little bit of research on women's clubs, and actually this was kind of a movement back in the progressive era that established the idea that women had a moral duty and responsibility to transform public policy. So this was kind of starting to be that era where women were starting to feel like maybe they could actually have a voice and start speaking out. So these clubs, which started out as social and literary gatherings, actually became a source of reform for various issues in the United States. So they were involved with issues surrounding education, temperance, child labor, juvenile justice, legal reform, environmental protection, library creation, and more. So, you know, very important women's issues, I would say, or issues for our society as a whole, but women coming together to really start to work and, you know, move some things forward socially. One of the things that obviously I just mentioned, library creation. So this particular Fond du Lac Women's Club was instrumental in our Carnegie Library, which is now demolished, which makes me very sad. I never saw that building, but I've seen pictures, and it looked to be quite impressive. So, you know, what I learned was that it became evident to people that, you know, the library that we had was just kind of not cutting it. It wasn't, you know, they needed to expand. So the women's club started to take notice, and because they were liberal patrons of the library, they kind of took this project under their wing. So they started doing some fundraising for the library. They had a department created in their club known as the Library Department. And a committee was appointed to continue to raise funds for the library. So they were actually the ones who secured the $30,000 donation from Andrew Carnegie to build the library. One of his stipulations was that the city council would provide a fund equal to 10% of the donation yearly for maintenance of the library. The city council promptly passed the ordinance, and that's how the library became, you know, came to be. So I just, again, I think it's really cool to see that such an important building in our community's history single-handedly came about because of this group of women. So then we've got Tudor Style. So this is another one of my personal favorites. Not a ton of information on this one. Sometimes the newer that the homes are, we don't always get a ton of information, but you know, 1930 certainly still considered historic. The City of Fond du Lac Historic Preservation Commission considers anything 50 years old or older to be eligible to be defined as historic. So this is a pretty good example of a Tudor style, I think. So in Tudor style, you see a steeply pitched roof because they're actually trying to emulate the thatched roofs that that were popular in England. I actually saw a thatched roof for the first time when I was in Paris. I went to Versailles, and in the back of Versailles, there's a little, it's called the Queen's Hamlet. So it's almost like it's a little farm. And there were several buildings there with beautiful thatched roofs. And it just was very interesting to me. And so these are they kind of started to emulate those. And they're always usually made of brick or stone and stucco, and the upper story often has half timbering. I did not know this until I was doing this research, but the half timbering, and this one doesn't have a ton, you can see a little bit of the detail, but some Tudor homes have a lot of that timbering. Most of the time now that's just for decoration, but back in the day, that was actually structural. So they would, it was basically like a wood frame, and then they filled it with stucco. So that's why you see all of the exposed beams on Tudor style homes. This was owned by William Reedon, and basically what I could ascertain about him was he had quite the career with the First National Bank of Fond du Lac. So that again was another kind of founding bank of Fond du Lac that I think might have become First Wisconsin. I'm not sure about that. But looks like, he was kind of a good example of, working your way up through the company. He started out in 1918 as a messenger, 1920 became a draft teller, 1922 became a note teller, 1945 he was in charge of the credit department, in 1964 he became a director, and then in 1966 he was vice president. So just a kind of a, neat example of someone who really worked their way up with hard work and being loyal to the company. So that just brings us back around to our most famous Italianate example that we have in Fond du Lac, which would be, of course, the Galloway house. And hopefully you've seen it in person. If you have not, I strongly encourage you to take a tour sometime. It's a beautiful home. It actually, the original house was built in 1846, but there are a couple of additions that were built, kind of 1860s, 1880s. But overall, the entire house itself is very old for Fond du Lac. I think our oldest home in Fond du Lac was built in like 1835. That's still standing, I should say. So this is one of my favorite pictures of the Galloway house, which actually makes the rounds on social media from time to time. I've seen it on I follow a lot of old house pages on Facebook, and occasionally someone will just share this because they like it and just think it's a beautiful example of an Italianate home, which it absolutely is. And this picture is perfect. I think it's a great Christmas photo, and so we actually use it a lot at Christmas time for the Galloway house. So that's all I have. Does anybody have any questions, comments, ideas on anything you'd like to see in the future? I'm definitely open to doing something like this again. Like I said, I just picked some of my favorite styles and kind of went with it. I literally looked at a list of architectural styles, picked a couple styles, and then tried to find some homes in Fond du Lac that had some either interesting architectural details or fun stories of the people that lived in those homes. So nobody wants to ask anything. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
First of all, I was sad not to hear about what was formerly the Big Pink House.
Oh, okay. Well, we can add that to our list for next time.
I think it's green now.
It is. It's teal and burgundy.
Yeah. I don't live in Fond du Lac, so, but I have a family history there, and there are a couple things for the future that I think other people might be interested in that I would love to hear about.
Okay.
One is, it's not politically correct, I suppose, to call it this, bum jungle. My father grew up during the Depression, and he talked a lot about escaping into bum jungle when he was skipping school.
Is that like a Hooverville or something?
Yeah, the Hooverville homeless encampment.
Okay.
And another thing that I had an interest in was hearing about the creation of Lake Park. And third and finally, again, probably not politically correct, but supposedly one of my not too distant ancestors was a madam, and
Oh,
I would like to hear about the brothels and that kind of thing in Fond du Lac County. She was supposedly a madam during the Depression in Fond du Lac.
I think that would be very interesting. I'm sure we all think that that stuff didn't really happen in our little town, but we all know
Right.
it probably did.
I mean, everyone knows the big, you always hear about famous people or the society matrons or whatever, but there's other things that go on in life that people don't necessarily want to talk about. But those would be my top three. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I love that feedback. Thank you so much for sharing that, because we obviously, we want to continue doing this educational series. So input from the community is really valuable about what people want to hear about. So thank you for that. Anyone else with comments, suggestions, constructive criticism for my first ever teaching experience?
Marion and I had a couple things in the group chat.
Okay.
When you talked about that booklet,
Yeah.
I think Terry Gaffney has all the addresses.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because he has some.
I thought it would be neat to do like a then and now kind of a thing.
Yeah, he did do something like that. So.
Oh, okay. I would love to see that.
So we should talk to Terry and Jane.
Okay.
And when you were talking about the women's club,
Yeah.
about the library,
Yeah.
they're the ones that also then decided to build the new library. So it was
The women's club did?
Yeah, the same women's group
Oh, okay.
that
Who decided to tear down the old one?
the same women's club that built it decided they wanted to update it and make it new. So they're the ones who wanted it torn down for the new one.
That makes me sad.
But but they're the ones. They're the ones that raised the money for both times.
Yeah, which I think is amazing. I love knowing that piece of history and knowing, especially, even because when was the new one built, in the 60s?
Well, it's 60, 69,
Okay.
68, 70, right in there.
Okay, so still an era where women were certainly having more of a voice, but still not like what we experience today. So just knowing that these women had such influence, I think is really cool.
It was really neat. I got to go to afternoon tea
Oh,
at the
really?
Women's Club in 1964
Really? Oh, fun.
because they honored the female valedictorians and salutatorians from the local high school,
Oh,
and they invited us to tea and gave us a scholarship.
what an honor.
So not the guys, just the girls.
Just the
So,
girl.
and they were really good in supporting education. That
Yep.
was-
That's what it sounds like. So apparently there are still women's clubs throughout the country. It has lessened as women have started to actually have more of a voice just on their own in society. But if we have one in Fond du Lac, I'm not aware of it. I know we have a lot of women's groups, but I don't think we still have a women's club, right? Or if we do, nobody knows about it. It's a good secret, I guess.
Teresa,
Yeah.
I have a comment. I adore Division Street, as you do.
Yes.
Years ago, I developed a PowerPoint on the history of the horse doctor. At the end of this PowerPoint, I said in the PowerPoint, there are remnants of the horse doctor present in our daily lives. And then I went down Main Street, and if you start going east on the south side, about the third, fourth, fifth resident, look at their garages, and they are characteristic of carriage houses. The colorful interview I had with one of the property members owners, I walked up with my camera and he came out and he says, "Can I help you?" And I said, "I'm fascinated with your garage. Is that an old carriage house?" He said, "Yes. I can tell on a hot day in the left corner, if it's humid, I can still smell the horse's urine.
Oh, wow.
And if you look at the Pink Ladies
Mm-hmm.
Park side entrance, there's an apartment above their carriage house.
Yep.
The magnificent carriage house is on Military and Division, northwest corner. Those people renovated that building before they started renovating their home. It is massive. It is an education just walking down Division, especially east towards the hospital.
Mm-hmm. I sold I don't know whose house it is. It was 97 South Park, I think. It's a big Victorian, that had, the garage was like a carriage house and there was still hay up in the loft.
Oh my gosh.
So I thought that was pretty cool. So yeah, there are definitely still some remnants of those days in Fond du Lac.
It is amazing.
Yes, very cool. So any other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us. So I think I can, I'll turn this back over to Kim and I think we'll finish up, but I really appreciate everybody joining, and, you know, taking time out of your busy schedule. Like I said, I mean, and if you're not comfortable speaking up, you know, feel free to email me, keenant@firstweber.com. If there's other houses you'd like to see featured, and, you know, we can definitely do our best to, you know, continue a series like this, not every week or anything like that, but definitely that is something that we're interested in doing. So thanks everyone.
Thank you.
And
We're going to be taking a summer recess from the weekly Fond du Lac history online, and we'll be coming back in the fall, hopefully in person. We're not sure how things are going to look, but we want to continue this type of a little online or in-person session with different speakers. And if anybody's interested in helping out, we're always happy to have volunteers. You can check the contact us through the website at fdlhistory.com. And the Backstage Pass is going to continue on Saturdays. They're broadcast first on Facebook. Lisa is doing different rooms in the Galloway house first, and that will be continuing through the summer. If you miss any of the Backstage Pass sessions, or if you've missed any of the other Fond du Lac Fun History meetings, those are also available on the website at fdlhistory.com.
Can I also say that I like the fact that this was virtual because, as I said, I don't live in Fond du Lac, and I wouldn't be driving there for the
live version.
yeah, live version. So I like this virtual, so I could participate. So just wanted to
thank you for the comment. We're glad you joined us. That's
Yes, very glad.
great point.
all right. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.
Thanks
I'll
again.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good summer.
Thank you.
Good
Bye-bye.
to see everybody.
Yeah, you too. Bye.
Bye.